good afternoon, and welcome to this special edition of IBA News, reviewing the week's top stories with a special spotlight this time on 20 years since the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and the effect it had on the implementation of the Oslo Accords. Joining me in the studio throughout the broadcast is former National Union MK, Professor Aryeh Eldad.
Shalom.
And Yariv Oppenheimer, Director General of the Peace Now movement. Thank
Hello.
you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
But first, this past week, the country marked 20 years since that historic night on November 4th, which almost instantly became engraved in the individual and national consciousness. The night Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish man, Yigal Amir. IBA's Efrat Batat takes a look at the series of commemorative events that took place this week.
The first of this week's events was the traditional Candle for Yitzhak ceremony, which was held at the president's residence in Jerusalem on Sunday night. Addressing the crowd, President Reuven Rivlin vowed that he will never commute assassin Yigal Amir's life sentence. Rivlin said, "As long as I am president of the state of Israel, Rabin's murderer will never be freed. Curse my hand if it should ever sign a pardon for that evil man." Rivlin's predecessor, Shimon Peres, who was with Rabin minutes before the murder, recalled the emotionally charged night of November 4th. Peres described how Rabin's face had shined and his voice shook as he joined the public in singing the famous Song of Peace, less than a few minutes before being shot. Peres went on to say that it was impossible to forget the incitement and the verbal abuse against an elected prime minister, and that unfortunately those voices continue to resonate today. Yonatan Ben Artzi, Rabin's grandson, said he condemned Yigal Amir as the Jew who killed the peace process, and possibly what he referred to as our last chance to reach an agreement with our neighbors. Ben Artzi added that by killing Yitzhak Rabin, Amir changed the political landscape in which we live in, before stressing that in his view, Israel's current leadership has no path and no solutions. On Monday, the official state ceremony at Mount Herzl took place. Speaking at the event, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, "Israeli society will never accept neither murder nor justifications for it, just as Yitzhak Rabin never accepted it himself. I'm not saying I agreed with Yitzhak Rabin on everything. We've had our differences on several issues, it's not a secret. But Rabin was innocent of self-flagellation. He never adopted the outrageous perception that even when we are a victim, we are guilty. He wanted to put an end to the conflict and acted for peace, but he too had also coped with waves of cruel terrorism." At a special Knesset session honoring the late Prime Minister, Netanyahu focused his speech on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that his predecessor sought to end. Netanyahu blamed the failure of peace talks on the Palestinians' refusal to recognize the right of the Jewish state to exist. Throughout the week, schools across the country held ceremonies and commemoration events, conducting special classes on the meaning of political murder and the importance of tolerance. The central Yizkor memorial tent was erected in Tel Aviv's Rabin Square, where it will remain until this coming Saturday, when the main rally commemorating the assassination is set to take place. President Rivlin is slated to commence the event, followed by former U.S. President Bill Clinton, who was in office at the time of the assassination and was considered a close friend of the slain Rabin. Organizers of the rally say that in light of recent events, the purpose of the mass gathering is to transform commemoration of the assassination into a symbol of democracy and establish a powerful society that will fight for its principles.
I'd like to begin with you, Professor Eldad. In the 20 years since the Rabin assassination, have the conditions for the peace process changed?
No, it's a 100 years war. We have different chapters. The names of the chapter will be totally dependent on the editor of this study, but it's an ongoing war with some ceasefire, some attempts to achieve peace, mostly with misdiagnosis of the disease, therefore the frustration why we don't have peace. We assume that we are in the midst of territorial conflict, and if this is a territorial conflict, we should divide the land. Therefore, all the attempts for division of the land, different plans. But it's a misdiagnosis. We are in the middle of ideological war, if you so wish, religious war, and therefore we are so frustrated that we cannot reach peace. So the Oslo Agreement was only another chapter in the misdiagnosis of the disease, therefore the failure.
Well, Yariv, how do you think the situation would have changed had Rabin not been assassinated?
It's a very big question to try to think what will happen if, and by the way, everything that I will say, no one can contradict it because no one will know. But I think that there are two things here that were changed in that horrible night. The first one is an Israeli issue. I think that Israel crossed over a red line that says that you are not killing, murdering prime minister or political figure because of his political views. And once we crossed this line, we became much less naive society, much less tolerance, and I think much more dangerous. And from to the outside world, Rabin started the process in a very honest way, and he reflects the honesty of most of the Israelis to live peacefully next to its neighbors. This is the reason why Jordan signed the peace treaty with Israel. And once Rabin was shot and no one took over, so the message to our neighbors and to the world was a different one. I believe that Rabin's personality, that he shows to the Israelis that he is coming from a security state of mind, not just a peacenik state of mind, like maybe people think that I am, but also he is coming with security and speak about peace as a security need. And to the Palestinian and to the Arab countries, he showed that he is serious, that he is mean business, he is reliable, and he is honest. And this is something that is so much missing, especially in the current leadership of Israel.
Professor Eldad, you talk about 100 years of conflict and war. What kind of formula can you envision being achieved?
Once you diagnose the disease and you understand that religious war never ends, you are not looking for a solution, for a healing of the disease, but for containment, for treatment. It's like a chronic disease that you don't really expect to cure, but to treat. I can't cure diabetes, but I can treat diabetes. Hypertension, I don't know how to cure it, I know how to contain it. And once we understand that the answer lies within this field, we should look for a formula to reduce friction, to reduce bloodshed, to reduce the extensiveness of the collision between the two sides, not for eternal peace, because we will never be able to achieve it.
I want to return to that, but first now we're going to take a quick look now and a pause to listen to what some people on the street had to say about the assassination and what the younger generation knows about Rabin's legacy and whether a political assassination could happen again.
I think Rabin realized that if we want to keep Israel as a Jewish country, then serious changes had to be made. And we probably would have gotten to some arrangement, I think also with the Palestinians, even though it would be very difficult.
How does that make you feel?
Sad.
Look, I think he was a wonderful person. I think he had a great intention. I don't think what he was trying to do, I don't think it was the right route of peace, especially now looking back at it. But then at the time, I also didn't believe in what he was doing. But I did think he was an amazing person who had a vision, and him together with Clinton and Arafat, they had a vision. I didn't believe in it, but unfortunately, this assassination happened, and the whole thing ended up being horrific.
You think we could have another political assassination?
I believe not. I believe we end with that.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's something that can't happen every year or every 20 years. It's something that happened one in a lifetime.
He was a good prime minister. Eventually died, killed basically, by Galamir. What do I know about him? Well, he was a great leader. Well, I supported his ideals, basically. Achieving peace, set events.
So looking back 20 years, do you think that Yigal Amir succeeded?
Yes, he did, because he cut what he did. I mean, he killed him, basically. And therefore, all the events that might have been occur towards, thanks to Rabin, yeah.
You think we could have another political assassination?
I hope not. I hope that we do have peace amongst ourselves, amongst our cousins, that they have peace amongst themselves, I pray for peace for the entire world.
In a related development, Chagai Amir, the brother of Rabin's convicted assassin Yigal Amir, was arrested this week on suspicion of incitement following a Facebook post in which he wrote that it was time for President Reuven Rivlin and the Zionist state to pass out of existence just like Sodom. Amir wrote the post in a response to the president's announcement that he would never pardon Yigal Amir, who is serving a life sentence. Chagai Amir was later released to house arrest in 2012. He finished a 16-year prison sentence for aiding Rabin's murder and for possession of an illegal weapon. Well, considering the volatile current situation, do you think that there could be another political assassination, Yuri?
Unfortunately, I think yes. The answer is yes, and the chances is now higher than in the past. We see the incitement, we see the violence, we see the lack of understanding that even if you have some different perspective and views and even belief, you cannot take the law into your hands. I have to admit that during the disengagement, I felt that many people in the right wing understood the lesson from Rabin assassination and limit the struggle and limit the language. Unfortunately, in the last few years, I feel that this limitation has disappeared, and we are again in this very scary jungle that people are using the social media, and we are not talking about just a few, we are talking about thousands of Israelis that are writing death to the Arabs, that are saying that they are happy that a Jewish person has died in a terrorist attack because he was part of the peace camp in Israel just a few days ago. Mm-hmm. And I think that the violent discussion coming not just from the people but also from the leadership is escalating in the last few years, and I'm not so sure that people really serious when they are talking about learning the lesson of Rabin assassination. I'm not taking them so seriously, unfortunately.
Professor Eldad, what do you feel about this?
It can happen here as it can happen in any other place in the world. It happened in the United States. It happened in other states. It seems that it's more likely to happen in a dictatorship. Mm-hmm. But even in democracies, you can, even if people say, yes, I've learned the lesson, there's always somebody at the corner who didn't. Mm. And you can't speak for 100% of the people. It takes only one to do the job.
We cannot ignore that this political murder was being acted by a religious person that think, and also Chagai Amir, his brother, Facebook was talking about the will of God. When you have religious factors, extremists, that they believe that they are the messengers of God and they are able to make decisions for all of us. They are not going to convince the public to vote for a different government. They are going to do what they think God will ask them to do. This is a very, very dangerous thing, and I'm not so sure that this is related, for example, to other assassination in America or other places. This is why I think it's so dangerous here, because people can take the religious ideas.
Who killed John Kennedy?
I don't think he did it in a religious reasons.
Not from religion, from another ideology. So all the ideologies should be executed, because otherwise they'll kill somebody.
But when you deal with the ideology that is being motivated by religious, some extremist people can believe that the rabbi is above the democracy, and even if the public voted for some candidate, because this is against the will of God as they understand it, they can do whatever they do.
So why they kill John Kennedy? For other reasons, for other ideology.
Let's turn to the incitement and the other wave of violence that's affecting us right now. Turning to the wave of violence, it shows no sign of abating, and this week saw a series of knife attacks and attempted stabbings, all which occurred in Judea and Samaria. Just today in Hebron, an Arab stabbed a soldier in the face and was shot dead. On Wednesday, a Palestinian attacker stabbed a mother of 8 in the back in Gush Etzion outside the Rami Levy supermarket, where Arabs and Jews shop together. The woman suffered moderate wounds, and the attacker was apprehended. It was the third attack in the Gush Etzion region this week. On Tuesday, soldiers shot and killed 2 Arabs there after they stabbed a soldier. There were other attacks in Hebron and Kiryat Arba, and on Sunday, a Palestinian stabbed an Israeli man in Ariel, and he succeeded in escaping. Defense officials say that the recent incidents signal a trend of violence that was shifting from the West Bank from Jerusalem and other cities to the West Bank, where police and security forces have heightened their presence. A vast majority of the Palestinian knife attackers have been quickly killed or neutralized during their attacks. But Dr. Anat Berko, a Knesset member from the Likud and an expert on terrorism, said they shouldn't necessarily be compared to suicide bombers.
In my point of view, they are not suicide bombers because suicide bomber, this is my expertise, use his body as a platform to kill himself and in order to kill others. This is not the case. Here we call it a sacrifice terror attack because sometimes he can stay alive or she can stay alive. So it's not a suicide terror attack.
But you make a differentiation between the suicide bombers and these people who are doing the attacks, and yet there is a sort of sacrifice that they know, many of them must know because of statistics, that they're not going to come out of this alive. So it is also a suicide attack, no?
No, because a suicide bomber acting like a robot when they go to the target. And if he wouldn't or she wouldn't kill themselves, the terror attack wouldn't be. And this is the difference. And it's totally different. So in the point of view of their perception of life and death, it could be because both of them thinking about the alternative life in the next world. But in the terror attack itself, on the way to the target, it's totally different.
Professor Eldad, has this wave of terror taken place because there is a lack of a peace process going on now?
I've heard Abu Mazen say that this is because the Jews dirtied the Temple Mount with their feet. I've heard John Kerry saying that this is because of the settlements. I've heard some people from the right wing in Israel saying that this is because of the occupation. I've heard others saying that this is because the poverty and the lack of infrastructure in East Jerusalem. I would lock all of these people in one room and ask them, please decide on one reason why it happened, and then I would forget it.
What about you?
I will say all of the above. And I think that when Israel is not hearing the people that are speaking with peace with Israel, and when the Palestinians are going to the UN, nothing is happening, and when they are going to America, nothing is happening, and when they are speaking to the Israeli public, no one really wants to listen. When Abu Mazen spoke against Hamas just one year ago after the kidnapping and the killing of the 3 teenagers in the West Bank, no one really took him seriously, and day after we just did whatever we want. But once the Jewish lobby in the Knesset start to use the Temple Mount in order to show more sovereignty and to try to humiliate even more the Palestinians, this was one step too much. And this is the reaction that we are getting. We said it in the beginning.
You are buying
and
their propaganda.
By the way, not only me buying, also Netanyahu. This is the reason why Netanyahu suddenly said, don't go up to the Temple Mount. Suddenly he's agreed to other things. And when I listen, like other people, to the most important people today in the government, including ministers and deputy ministers, speaking about changing the status quo in the Temple Mount, when I see what's going on in the national religious movement, when they become, in the past, few years ago, it was not allowed to go to the Temple Mount. Today, it's the most trend things to do. So they are changing the character of this place. And when you are doing that, you are giving the terrorist prize. But, many people in the right wing are saying when you have a political process, then there is also suicide bombers and big attacks. But then there is also an opposition for that. When the Hamas tried to blow up the peace process, most of the Palestinian people were against it. Today, when there is no peace process, all the Palestinians unite behind these youngsters, terrorists, because this is the only way that they feel that they can affect us and can maybe protect some of their rights.
You're talking about the Temple Mount. Let's move on to this next story. In an attempt to quell the violence, Israel and Jordan this week agreed to place a 24-hour surveillance camera on the Temple Mount in order to ensure transparency. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterated Israel's policy regarding the status quo at the Jerusalem site. So let's hear what he had to say.
As we have said many times, Israel has no intention to divide the Temple Mount, and we completely reject any attempt to suggest otherwise. We respect the importance of the special role of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, as reflected in the 1994 peace treaty between Jordan and Israel, and the historical role of King Abdullah II. Israel will continue to enforce its long-standing policy. Muslims pray on the Temple Mount, non-Muslims visit the Temple Mount. We support the call for the immediate restoration of calm and for all the appropriate steps to be taken to ensure that violence ceases, that provocative actions are avoided, and that the situation returns to normalcy in a way that promotes the prospects for peace. We look forward to working cooperatively to lower tensions, stop incitement, and discourage violence.
Professor Eldad, do you think the status quo has to be maintained?
No. I think the status quo should be changed. The status quo that started in '67, that allowed the Waqf, the Muslim Waqf, to control Temple Mount and forbids Jews to pray in the holiest place. As long as the Arabs looks at the abnormal situation, the Jews say time and again that Temple Mount is their holiest place. Supreme Court said it. Temple Mount is the holiest place for the Jewish people. And when they look at the fact that we give it up and give it to their sovereignty and allow Jordan to say what will happen then and what will not happen there, they understand that if we give up our holiest place, it means that we might be like the Crusaders. We are not deeply rooted in this land. We can be pushed out with pressure, a little more pressure. Once we understand that Temple Mount is not just a religious problem for the Muslims and a national problem for the Jews, it's the key issue of the conflict. Who will control Temple Mount will control the land of Israel.
You review here what Professor Eldad had to say, but the Palestinians also use the Temple Mount as incitement. Do you agree with the steps that the Prime Minister is taking now?
First of all, I agree. I think that the Prime Minister is taking the responsible decisions. Unfortunately, he's doing it a bit too late. And if he would listen to people like Peace Now, that we had a campaign telling him and his ministers go down of the Temple Mount, maybe if he will do the same policy a few months before, we can save people's life. But I think that we need to understand that the Israeli state was established without the Temple Mount, even without the Wailing Wall. The Zionist movement never saw the Temple Mount as the reason for its existence. The Zionist movement is a political movement that tried to establish a political home, a political state to the people of Israel. There is a difference between the land of Israel and the state of Israel. And when we are taking a place that is so important for Muslims and Jews and create this place instead of a holy place, a political place, then there will not be any chance to solve the conflict.
You advocate Zionism without Zion.
No, I'm not saying without
This
Zion.
Is Zion. Temple Mount is Zion.
But I'm not talking about
literally. This is Zion.
So how come Ben Gurion announced the Israeli state without this place?
He wasn't strong enough. He wished for. When you asked Ben Gurion after the 6 Days War, he was ready to give up everything except Golan and Jerusalem because he was a Zionist.
In the proposal solution that we have on the table, there will be joint sovereignty over the Temple Mount, like there is today, even maybe a bit better. When we will solve the political conflict, we will find ourselves that the religious conflict is not so difficult like we think it is.
Well, maybe science fiction is not my type of reading, but there's no combined sovereignty on any piece of land in the world.
What is the sovereignty now in the Temple Mount?
Israel.
No, the Waqf.
Israel. We are not implementing it, but Israel
today
is
we have joint sovereignty.
No.
This is de facto.
Well, perhaps it's time for creative leadership, as we hear from U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry.
It is absolutely vital for Israel to take steps that empower Palestinian leaders to improve economic opportunities and the quality of life for their people on a day-to-day basis. And it is equally important for Palestinian leaders to cease the incitement of violence and to offer something more than rhetoric. Instead, propose solutions that will contribute in a real way to the improvement of life, to the reduction of violence, and to the safety and security of Israelis. Firm and creative leadership on both sides is absolutely essential. A two-state solution with strong security protections remains the only viable alternative.
We're running out of time, but I'd like to get your reaction to what he had to say, both of you. Professor Eldad.
He's a failure. He didn't succeed in any of his attempts to implement U.S. policy in the Middle East. And here, some people look and listen to him very carefully. He's a failure. None of his ideas worked. Why we should regard Israel as a lab for his experiment?
I don't want to advocate for Kerry, but he's the one that dismantled Syria from biological weapon, and also he's behind the treaty with Iran, and maybe he's the one to be responsible to stop the nuclear program of Iran, or the nuclear bomb of Iran. So I will not dismiss this, but I think that what is missing in American policy is the policy. The rhetoric is fine, but we don't see a real policy. I believe that eventually the White House and this government, this American government, decided to pull out from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and just to give up. And this is my biggest criticism over the American policy.
We're unfortunately running out of time, but please stay with us for this last final item. And this happened this week too. The season's first heavy storm battered many parts of the country.
לא, תסתכל אחורה. יו, נופל! וואי!
Heavy downpours, violent winds, and stormy conditions knocked down trees, cranes, and power lines, causing electricity outages from the north to the south. And some 60,000 households, primarily in the Sharon region, were in the dark for nearly 72 hours until they were finally reconnected Wednesday morning. And as if there wasn't enough, shortly after, unusual amounts of rain in the central Sharon region began to pour, causing widespread flooding in Ra'anana, Kfar Saba, and Herzliya. Dozens of people got trapped in their homes or vehicles, and buses and train services in the area were suspended for several hours. That's all for this broadcast. We hope you'll be able to we will be able to resume our regular daily broadcasts in the upcoming weeks. In the meantime, we encourage you to let us know what you think, and please send us your comments to ibaletters@gmail.com. That's ibaletters@gmail.com. Thanks again to our guest, Professor Aryeh Eldad and Yariv Oppenheimer. I'm Ariel O'Sullivan, wishing you a good evening, a good week, and shalom from Jerusalem.